Photography Daily.
It's funny actually. When I first started, I was cutting out stencils, and my dad was joking, "Oh, Roy's going to be a street artist," and it was, it was just like, "Ah, ha, ha, yeah, come on, very funny."
A wonderful story to start the week, and I think an inspirational one too, of how one man's humble iPhone 4 has led to a career in art and photography.
Taking photos of these miniatures, you could get eye level with a figure that's only 15 millimeters tall. So it started there, and that's what captured my imagination, in the sense of just really enjoying what was coming out the other end of the phone, essentially.
Welcome to Roy's World, or more specifically, Roy's People, where Roy Tyson creates witty and intriguing imagery with customised miniature figures. And though he's now represented by internationally important people in the art world, it all started closer to home. Much closer to home.
And then when I started putting them online, or showing friends and family first, you might put one on Facebook and your family will see it and your friends will see it, and they were enjoying it as well. So it kind of eggs you on a bit, doesn't it? You think,
it does, yeah.
Oh, okay, I'll make some more of this.
Having a hobby is one thing, but making it into a career.
I have my dad in one ear saying, "You've got to get a job."
Yeah.
I'd also just got my first mortgage, and so he's saying, "You've got to get a job, and I'm like, well, I've started selling these bits on eBay. What if I'm onto something here? And
there's a reason why I've called today's episode Taking Your Leap of Faith, because this is a classic story of trusting instinct, feeling your way, making that leap.
I discovered a creative side of something that I didn't know I could do, really. I was just learning every day. I was just getting the figures and learning, and then learning photography at the same time.
We talk a lot about photography. We're a photography-based show after all, but more and more my conversations are starting to touch base with the art world too.
The medium of photography is just becoming even more legitimate as time goes on in the art world.
Yeah.
Especially if you look at the bigger photographers that would release an image in a print form as a limited edition.
We talk about how Roy makes these tiny worlds which he then photographs, attracting clients including the likes of Ted Baker, Apple and the Royal Mint.
So I'll look at the figures, the body positions of the different figures that I've got, take a leg from that one, an arm from that one, and put it all together into one figure. So they end up becoming miniature sculptures in their own right.
And then business. As you'll find out, Roy Tyson didn't go through art college or formal photographic training, so what did he learn along the way?
Certain people expect certain things for free, because they might sell it to you out of exposure and all that rubbish.
Yeah.
That is the way it did start.
We talk about the future.
And that's something that I'm putting a lot of focus on at the moment, trying to build collector base, manage galleries more efficiently, do exclusives. There's lots of different ways that you can, explore your avenues to try and really drive, people wanting to buy your artwork.
And we talk about confidence. Surely, with the success he's achieved, that's a given.
I'm always quite nervous to go out onto the street and do these figures. Strangely, I'm not massively confident.
Stories of life told by photographers, and today that photographer and artist is Roy Tyson.
I hope I'm in sync with a lot of artists, but you have that thing of so many times where you think, I should just get a job, and then you wake up the next day and think, no, bollocks to that, I'm not going to get a job. I love what I do.
Patron of the day today is a new patron to us, Christine Bird, and I'll link to her Instagram account today in the show notes. Her missions with a Leica and at times a Canon. I can see that the wilds, nature and occasionally architecture seem to be your thing. I chuckled wryly at Rio, parked on your head, which will make total sense with Christine's name and grid when you go visit. And a wonderful study of living on the coast is there too. My blood pressure halved, Christine, I'm sure, within minutes. For the price of a fancy large latte per month, patrons are helping to build and keep this podcast as a 3-day-a-week full-length photography show. And tomorrow, in the More episode over on the Patreon channel, today's guest shares an extra story about how a mechanic turned pharmacy sales rep opened up the art world. We're also supported by MPB.com, the #1 platform for buying, selling and trading used camera gear, with offices and warehouses now in Brighton, UK, Brooklyn, USA, and now Berlin for Europe. Here's a mail from Craig Hughes. Hey Neil, I just thought I'd share a thought about MPB as I've used them a lot. I started my photography journey with a second-hand Canon 1000D, then moved on to the 7D and then the 6D, and with a few L lenses as well before finally buying into the Fuji system. Now, some people will only buy the newest, shiniest gear, whereas I've never bought any new equipment, and I've had no problems or doubts about buying used. Like Craig, I have bought, sold, but also traded with MPB, easy from start to finish, especially lenses, which is something I think MPB are really good at dealing with. Perfectly reported and graded every single time I've bought one through them. Never had to worry about it being chipped or something being in the lens or just something that isn't reported that you find out when you receive it and think, oh, now we've got to go through trying to get my money back. Nope, not with MPB. Not been a problem at all. Easy sailing every single time. Go to mpb.com. One of the most wonderful things about finding guests for this podcast is the breadth of creatives I've fortunately been able to speak to. One moment, internationally renowned news photojournalists, the next, authors, humanitarian photographers, and today something, a little different. Quite literally a little different. A story about art, photography, self-belief and miniature people today. Now, I went to my first model village as a child in a place called Madurodam with my parents and their Dutch friends, 20 minutes or so from where we were staying in Rotterdam, in Holland. It was the only holiday abroad I ever took with my mum and dad. I was about 4-ish, young enough to have very sketchy memories, but it must have been that somehow got trapped in my long-term memory banks. That's had me fascinated about Miniatureville, small world, small people, the magic of being shrunk down to a size where you could perhaps live in these places, just for one day. My youngest has the very same fascination now, and I see through his eyes what I think I used to see, and I think perhaps I still do. There are a small number, forgive the television news bulletin style pun, of artists who've broken big into the world of art with miniature figures. Japanese artist and photographer Tanaka Tatsuya, I'll link to his work today in the show notes, is one who's been in this game for quite some time. He has nearly 3 million followers now on Instagram who marvel at a small figurine jet skiing on a human-sized nail clipper. It makes sense when you see it. Another one bathing in a cup of coffee like it's a hot tub. Tiny astronauts investigate some alien-style pistachio eggs. And a small action figure Spider-Man looks at home on a cracked iPhone screen. Their photographs and their installations. Galleries and collectors like what they find. Tanaka manages to whip one of these fantastical scenes up every single day. Meanwhile, to the east of England, the following figures are growing. TV pun entirely intended for Roy Tyson, whose work includes 00-sized model railway figures, one waiting for his scale model electric car to charge from 2 AA batteries, canoeists coming out of a spill from an upturned cup of thick vanilla milkshake, and a sign of the times, a COVID testing station, where a bottle of vaccine towers over a small Santa who's brought this gift to a line of socially distanced figurines waiting for the present to be served up. This is photography that makes you smile. This is artistry that, as an installation, would doubtless draw you in close, wondering at its inventiveness. It's sometimes dark and wry and tackles social issues too. Today is a story about an artist and a photographer who tells his story of self-belief, whose break comes after being made redundant, who made a pact, it seems, never to return back to having somebody else call the shots. Going it alone can be scary, going it alone can be lonely at times, but going it alone is exactly what Roy Tyson has done. Although he's done it with a crowd of people, thousands of people actually, mostly 15mm or so tall, known as Roy's people. Roy, what do I describe this art as? Is it street art? Is it mini art, miniaturism, photo art? I've seen it described as all sorts of stuff, even urban art.
Well, originally when I started, it was my inspiration was from street art.
Yeah.
And that sort of following the likes of Banksy and D-Face, Ben Ine, big street artists. I was so into collecting, essentially. It sort of inspired me into exploring art which then, when I kind of stumbled across the miniature figures, then made me just want to be able to do it on the street.
Yeah.
It's funny actually. When I first started, I was cutting out stencils, and my dad was joking, "Oh, I'm always going to be a street artist," and it was, it was just like, "Oh, ha ha, yeah, come on, very funny." And then when I discovered the figures and fell in love with the whole miniature juxtaposition that you could create on the street, it sort of became street art. I guess it could have gone completely the other way. I could have probably turned it more towards fine art and sculpture if I had taken the figures in a different direction. But because I went and took the figures straight out to the outdoors, it became known as street art. I guess, over the years, it's developed even more to the point of not becoming street art, because, in my head, street art is graffiti and all that sort of stuff. And I'm not that. I'm just, miniature figures, putting them on the street. So I quite like the idea that it's very broad, and it can't be pinpointed,
Where on earth did the idea come from then? I know there are a handful of artists in the world that think in a similar miniature way. There's Slinkerchew, for example. I know of his work. But there aren't that many of you.
No, and I think that's kind of a lucky beauty of it. So it came about because I was taking photos of a model train track just with my iPhone. It was an iPhone 4 I had at the time. And it was just because, the way the camera is on a phone, it's located to one side of it rather than in the middle. So you could create all these kind of weird angles that you couldn't really get in a sort of conventional camera, or not as easy. Whereas just plonking your phone on the table and taking photos of these miniatures, you could get eye level with a figure that's only, 15 millimeters tall. So it started there, and that's what captured my imagination, in the sense of just really enjoying what was coming out the other end of the phone, essentially. And then when I started putting them online or showing friends and family first, you might put one on Facebook and your family will see it and your friends will see it, and they were enjoying it as well. So it kind of eggs you on a bit, doesn't it? You think,
it does, yeah.
Oh, okay, I'll make some more of this.
Well, if you don't mind, Roy, what I'm going to do is do a kind of potted history to fast forward us into a bit of a life decision. You did art at school, but you didn't go to art college as such. You trained as a car mechanic for Ford, ended up following your family into sales, became a farmer rep. Company restructure meant you got made redundant, and you ended up, importantly, on gardening leave. And in the meantime, because this is important as an interest, you'd started photographing the figures, which you were enjoying, I know. And at this point, you had this sort of 90-day decision, didn't you? Go find a job or see what you could do otherwise.
That was the idea of it. So I've got to be honest, for 3 months, I had my dad in one ear saying, "You've got to get a job."
Yeah.
I'd also just got my first mortgage, and so he's saying, "You've got to get a job, and I'm like, well, I've started selling these bits on eBay. What if I'm onto something here? And secretly I was just focusing on that. I didn't really go for another job.
That's the interesting thing, though, isn't it? Because you had that self-belief. You thought, look, I'm doing something here. Something artistic is happening to my life, something creative, and it's going somewhere. And I'm going to go with this journey. And a lot of creatives don't dare, do they?
Yeah, exactly. Ever since I was young, I've always wanted to work for myself. I've always wanted to be my own boss. And that was always my kind of drive. So this was like, I discovered a creative side of something that I didn't know I could do, really. I was just learning every day. I was just getting the figures and learning, and then learning photography at the same time, so that obviously I could move from taking pictures on my iPhone to then using a DSLR.
Well, it's the photography bit that I'm interested in, actually, because a lot of this is, I know you have installations, so there's frames, there's the three-dimensional stuff that you do, but a lot of it is primarily photography, isn't it? So do you see yourself as an artist or as a photographer? What are you?
I think I definitely see myself more an artist than a photographer.
Yeah.
And I don't really know where I kind of draw the line on that, but I think photography is becoming much more of an art form every year, isn't it? I know it always has been, but I think that the medium of photography is just becoming even more legitimate as time goes on in the art world.
Yeah.
especially if, you look at the bigger photographers that would, release an image in a print form, as a limited edition. So I think photographers are artists in their own right. And I think my mix is the photography came first, and then the installations came after, because I realised that people wanted to own the figures, not just the image.
So when you're making these pictures, I'm interested technically how you do it. Often when we talk about photography here, I kind of steer clear of the of the technical stuff, but I am intrigued because we're going into a slightly different world with your photography. Well, a very different world. For a start, it's miniature, so I assume that you're using some kind of macro lens.
It's pretty basic, really. I use 100mm macro Canon.
Yeah, I know you use a 60. No wide angles or anything like that?
Yeah, I've got one wide angle lens. I only bought it because it was a wide angle lens that allowed me to get close to the figures, whereas the macro is just, you're getting close to the image and that's it. But the macro lens is the one that I've adapted to using on, I'd say 9 out of 10 of my pictures are the macro lens.
Yeah. So the figures that you, I think you cut them up a bit, don't you? You chop arms off, you move them around, you re-glue them, you repaint them. Are these standard model figures that you would get for your 00 railway set?
Yeah, essentially. They do a massive range of these 00 HO scale figures. Yeah. And what I discovered when I first started was that there's loads of them. There are lots of options you could do with these figures, but they're limiting. And this was the problem I found, is that the ideas I had, I couldn't create because they didn't make a figure for what I wanted to create. So this was right at the start as well, within probably a couple of weeks of, actually starting to take pictures of figures. Then I just got used to cutting off the arms, adding bits of clothing, changing heads, legs, everything,
So how many figures do you have in stock then?
Oh, it's hard to say because they're in just big boxes. I reckon I've got a couple of thousand figures now in the studio.
Just waiting.
Yeah. And if this was visual, I could show everyone. But essentially, all these figures are now white, so they come unpainted, and they're just like you get them in all different shapes and sizes. But what it allows me to do is I now just think, right, okay, if I want to create a footballer, or for me now it's like, where can I buy them? It's how can I make them? Yeah. So I'll look at the figures, the body positions of the different figures that I've got, take a leg from that one, an arm from that one, and put it all together into one figure. Wow. So they end up becoming miniature sculptures in their own right.
How did the commercial work start to roll? Because I imagine with clients like Apple and Ted Baker, and these are big household names. When did they start to knock on the door? Because the moment that happened, I should think that was the start of payday.
You would have loved to have thought so, wouldn't you? But
yeah, you're going to prove me wrong here.
There's such a big thing in the art world, and it's forever happened, and it probably forever will happen. I'm sure you've probably come across it, is that certain people expect certain things for free, because they might sell it to you out of exposure and all that rubbish. Yeah. That is the way it did start. Time Out magazine was the first publication and I think name that, if I said to someone, oh yeah, Time Out magazine, they want to do some pictures. They were the first ones to sort of get me on board with creating pictures. And it was free. It was just like, yeah, can you do these? We want to create some images to go in our spring edition. You'll get this, and this. And, I didn't get paid, but it did get me in the magazine. And that then led on to a few other things. But I'd say once I had a couple of them under my belt, that's when I was able to sort of start. Probably get the confidence to say, yeah, I can do that for you, but it's going to cost this.
And I would imagine the credibility of having organisations like Saatchi Arts, who now represent some of your works behind you, helps the the process of validation, Roy, I suppose. It's created a commercial persona for you. But how do you price your work? I think it's something as artists, as photographers, as creatives, we all have a bit of trouble with to an extent.
It's one of the things, pricing artwork is so difficult for artists. And I've got to a point where I'm comfortable with the price of my artworks and what I sell them for. But really, I think I could have done this differently, where they probably could have been so much more valuable by now. And that's something that I'm putting a lot of focus on at the moment, trying to build collector base, manage galleries more efficiently, do exclusives. There's lots of different ways that you can, explore your avenues to try and really drive, people wanting to buy your artwork.
Yeah.
And certainly having the big names that I've been lucky to work with, that's definitely helped me. But that only essentially came because I started by just doing it for free.
Before we turned on the big red button for record here, I remember you saying to me, we're very similar in that we have studios at the end of our gardens, essentially. And I looked back along the length of your garden, and I know your wife is busy looking after your little one. And when you leave that, essentially the front door of your house, and walk to your office, which for me is about 50 steps or so, what happens when you get into that room? I'm fascinated by a sort of typical day of a miniaturist street artist.
I guess in the classic sense of an artist, every day is different. Funny enough, it's Monday, and Monday is now become the day of doing admin, and as rubbish as that sounds, it is.
That's the same for me. Emails and admin day, Monday.
Yeah, get them done. I literally, just before speaking to you, I've just been able to start and work on some figures. As an artist and creative, you can sometimes really get a good sense of vision. You're like, some days you'll go in, you're like, right, I know exactly what I want to do today.
Yeah.
Or you might have a project that you've got to do or got to continue with, and you've got something to work to. Because then once you've got something to work to, things will just flow.
What are you working on now then? Because I'm interested where your ideas come from. Sometimes I would imagine you must wake up in the middle of the night and think, that's what I need to do. Do you keep a notepad by your bed?
Well, you know what? It's funny you say that. The last couple of months, I've thought to myself, right, I'm going to do everything digitally now. So I am a classic to-do list notepad type person. I've always got a to-do list, and I couldn't do without that. So now it's like I write everything on my phone or my iPad. I don't have any notepads anymore. But that thing of an idea just popping into your head, I'm sure every artist or creative will tell you that it happens, and it's great though, because the best thing about that is you haven't had to work for it. You wake up, bang, you've had an idea. Great. You haven't had to sit there thinking all day, what am I going to do? What am I going to make? Where's my next best idea coming from? So when you do have that moment of genius and you wake up and you quickly make a note of it, makes life really easy, because then you just go and make that idea, and you're not dwelled on, I think another thing is kind of creative block that all artists get all the time. And you think, what the hell am I going to make? So yeah, when an idea pops into your head, then thank God for that.
Back with Roy Tyson in a moment. Coming soon, a brand new weekend edition of Photography Daily. It's a business-focused Sunday supplement, still waiting for a fancy name, for any photographers who are in business and want to grow their photography business. And for those who are wanting to become professional in the wedding, portrait and commercial photography arena. And I'd like an insight into the businesses of those already working within it. And just before we return to Roy, our friends at Studio Ninja again this month. The studio management software people have an offer for Photography Daily professional photographers. If you are running your business through multiple calendars and spreadsheets and written to-do lists, it takes less than 30 minutes to set Studio Ninja up, and then you'll have everything you need in one place, like a diary, workflow, address book, invoicing, e-sign contracts, and you get 50% off your first year of use by entering the code PHOTODAILY50. That's the numerical 50. PHOTODAILY50 when you go to studioninja.co. Links will be on the show page, of course. Back to Roy of Roy's People. What are the favourite pieces that you've created? I mean, they all have their own humour.
There's a couple of images that have really lasted, and that was one with the bottle top, using a bottle top as an umbrella. That was a completely random picture, actually, that I did whilst I was in Norway, in Bergen. And whilst I had the idea of using bottle tops as umbrellas, there's the thing of having the idea and then coming out with a decent image of it is a whole nother thing. And that was one of those images that it was completely by chance. Took this picture, looked back and thought, that looks good. This is the one, if anyone has a look, there's like an image with a green bottle top and a couple standing under it.
Yeah, I know it.
It was an edition I created of 50 prints. It sold out. I could sell it now, and it's always the one that grabs people. So that one I'm very proud of. There's another one called, which was a CSI scene, where it's miniature CSI figures investigating cigarette butts. That's probably the second one that image that I'm most proud of, because again, I could use it now and it would still have the same engagement that it did.
What about the installations? Is there a standout?
I've got one, which was an image I did. It was called Riot Police, and it was just a load of riot police smashing up a miniature police van. I did the image of it. The image of it is not so great. It's okay, but it's a bit like, whatever. But the installation I love, I absolutely love it.
Well, when you're selling them, where you started in the early days, of course, but not on Facebook, and that's what sort of created this interest. But now you're not. Now you're selling them through art dealers, aren't you?
Yeah. It was something that I did focus on a lot to start with, because I where I was in the pharmaceuticals, my job was to sell pharmaceutical packaging. So my every day was just like sell. But that gave me the kind of foundation to start with. I wasn't afraid to put my artwork in front of people. And whilst I think I'd probably only ever been in a couple of galleries in my life before all of this. I wasn't afraid to. So where I was close to London, I made a massive effort to just contact every gallery and show them what I was doing. And luckily I picked up a couple, and then that developed into a few more. And it got a bit messy, I suppose, in a sense, because I had lots of galleries all around the country representing me, which was good in the sense of reaching, selling, income. But then I also saw a different side to working with so many galleries and didn't quite enjoy it. So now I'm in a good position where I've got a few galleries that I work with. They're people I like working with, which I think is very important with if you're going to have a relationship with a gallery. So it's making those gallery connections work.
I'm intrigued as to what passers-by say when you're doing your installations outside and photographing them, and you're on the floor and you're sort of putting miniatures together, and people are passing you by thinking, what's that guy doing? Most
people say nothing. I think a lot of people look, obviously. If someone's lying on the floor or even just sitting on the floor with the camera on the floor, I think people just, it's intriguing enough to look at what's going on.
Yeah.
Most people say nothing, but every now and then someone will come and say, what are you doing or what you're up to? And I love that. I absolutely love it. Because I'm always quite nervous to go out onto the street and do these figures. Strangely, I'm not massively confident. So sometimes when I do it, I'm like kind of trying to do the picture quickly or, as kind of efficiently as I can. But then at the same time, I'm nervous because depending on where I'm doing these pictures, if it's busy and it's where people walk, then there is the chance that the figures can get trodden on. So you'll be putting the figures down and that has happened. It always gets a nice reaction with people. Once they look closer and can see the figures and then they understand what I'm doing, it's always like brings a smile and generally, you know, a good bit of conversation with it. So,
right. I definitely smiled when I saw it. I do want to know what two particular people think about your work. One's a set of people, what your mates think about your work, because it's a very different world to what you were in, and they'll be looking at you thinking, what's Roy doing? He's putting his miniatures on the floor, he's appearing in Saatchi and making stuff for Apple. And your dad, who originally thought, come on, son, go out and get yourself this job, and now you've proved that there's that you've made it in the creative world.
Friends are, I think the novelty is massively gone. I think you have the general chit chat, don't you, with your friends? It depends where you are, really. But you have friends in the art world, so that are artists and that, you know, become very close friends.
Yeah.
Their conversations are all creative.
Yes.
They're always, you know, talking to each other about ideas, and you know, and that could be creative ideas, or that could be commercial ideas. It could be what you might do with an Instagram post that might, you know, get better engagement, that sort of thing.
Well, what about your dad, though? Because I should think he's immeasurably proud by what you've done.
Yeah, I think so. So I think initially when it was a case of, you know, just not really being able to see, I was kind of chancing my arm at, you know, making something. I think now it's like, I don't think my dad would actually let me go and quit now. You know, I hope I'm in sync with a lot of artists, but you have that thing of so many times where you think, I should just get a job. And then you wake up the next day and think, no, bollocks to that, I'm not going to get a job. You know, I love what I do. You know, I might have struggled this month, but next month might be different. And I think now my dad would be massively for, if I ever came to that position of, you know, doubting myself or thinking, you know, do something else, I think it'd be, you know, a case of no, you know, crack on with what you're doing. I think he would, you know, massively back me.
My thanks to Roy Tyson, who returns tomorrow for our patrons. We chatted further following the conversation you've just heard, and we started to talk about the art galleries he'd approached to launch his career. My approach to start with was an approach that everyone in the art world will say, oh, you can't do that. And yeah, whatever. But my approach was to email every gallery in London. Find out what happened and why it has significance, I think, for us all as photographers, as we learn to embrace the word no. Some personal thoughts as we take more of the conversation in the Patreon feed, which you'll find on the Photography Daily website. On Wednesday, I'm digging deep insofar as I've had to go and learn about the sport of basketball to talk with Andrew D. Bernstein, who is one of the most respected photographers in American sport and the legend of NBA. He'll talk about life behind the lens, capturing some of the biggest international names in that sport, building an archive for a sport that unbelievably didn't have one, his close working friendship with the late Kobe Bryant, and some tips of his own about working in sports photography. You have to be a genuine person. You have to come through with promises that you make. You have to meet deadlines. You have to treat people respectfully. And that's it for today. Keep sending your questions or feedback to studio@photographydaily.show so that I can feature you in the mailbag edition, which is the Friday Photo Walk. And on that note, be sure to visit today's website show page for links to our guests, Patreon, our sponsors, and everything talked about. You'll find a link on the description in your podcast player app. Music in the show was from artlist.io, and I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you and talking with you next time.
Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.